In this special edition of Sermons at St John's, we take a break from preaching to have a conversation with local poet and artist Jake Hawkey. We talk all things art and faith and celebrate the launch of Jake's exclusive poetry pamphlet, The Offering. This conversation was part of a mini arts festival, Come and See, at St John's Newton Breda Presbyterian Church in Belfast. We hope you enjoy the conversation. Good evening, everybody. You're very welcome here. Really delighted to get the chance to talk to Jake tonight. And so about a year ago, I got an email in the inquiries box, maybe more than a year, from this young guy asking if it would be okay if he came to church some Sunday. And as a minister, that's the dream, that people email asking you if they can come to church. So Jake and I had a coffee. I discovered not because you told me, Jake, but I had my ways of finding out. Discovered you were a poet. Not only that, a published poet as well. This is Jake's first publication, But and Though. And I was an English teacher, if you don't know me. And I have to say, I was a bit nervous getting a copy and reading it in case I didn't like it. But thankfully, I loved it. I really loved it. And I read it through twice, a short space of time. And I've been reading the poems again recently. And it's just a delight to be able to talk to you tonight, Jake, about your poetry and about you. So can we start by telling us a little bit about your story? Once you start to speak, people will quickly realize you're not from Belfast. So tell us about where you're from and your upbringing.
So I'm from South London. I'm from Woolwich, where the ferry is. My mum is still there. My family is still there. I come over to Belfast in 2018 to study poetry at Queen's, and just stayed. And we have a boy here now. Family is good. How did I get into making?
Yeah, tell us about that. Where did you always have an interest in the arts, in poetry, or where did it begin?
I remember during school, the syllabus of poetry was World War I and World War II orientated, and I remember that resonating with me. It's only in hindsight when these things become quite clear, but I'm a child of an alcoholic, and I grew up in the shadow of that, which is what my first book is about. And I think I really identified with being in the trenches and people making beautiful things out of chaos, I think. And I was in a band when I was in school, and I wrote kind of like...
There are videos on YouTube if you search hard enough.
There's no videos on YouTube. It was all very indie, I thought I was Pete Doherty, that kind of thing, Yeah. But it was really fun. I mean, what I really loved about making songs in bands is it was like you and your friends against the world, Yeah. Like you would make these songs and you would practice them, and it was like this camaraderie. And but I always felt like I put a lot more effort in than other people did. So I quite liked making stuff on my own eventually. And so I wrote lyrics, and that was the kind of first thing. And I thought, these could be poems, I guess. And then I studied photography for 2 years. I did like a BTEC National Diploma. I don't even know if they do those anymore. But back when I did one, it was I was in a dark room and I learned how to use film, I learned how to develop, and like the real old school way. And the guy who taught me was a wedding photographer, and there's nothing he didn't really know about film and how to produce film. So I learned the real old school way of like physical making in a dark room, and I really, really enjoyed it. And after those 2 years, I knew I wanted to go to art school, but I didn't know what I was going to make. I didn't know what I was going to do, but I just knew I needed to go to art school. Thankfully I didn't have anybody sensible around me, because otherwise I wouldn't have gone to art school. So I went to art school, and I remember watching this documentary, actually. I thought about this recently because David Hockney passed away. And there's a documentary of him in the 60s talking about art school. Because in the 60s, what you had was universities and art schools weren't always combined in the way they are now.
Yeah.
Art schools used to be these kind of separate, hot, wild houses, and they've become kind of, maybe gentrified or sort of put in together with academia. He was talking about going to art school, and he just, how David Hockney is, and he just talks about having a great time, and I thought, it'd be so good to do something like that. But what I really enjoyed about going to art school was just learning to take making seriously, and I made in every possible medium. I made film, I made video, I made paintings, I made poems. I went to Memphis one time and filmed myself on Bill Street reading poems. It's amazing my camera didn't get stolen because I just put a camera in the street and filmed myself. So I did everything, and it was amazing. And then after art school, I worked in a bowling alley in South London. How did I end up doing that? I think I had a job selling perfume to women in a clothes shop, which I enjoyed.
Yeah.
And when that went wrong, I got a job in a bowling alley.
Sounds like there's a story there, Jake, but we'll gloss over that.
But we're in church.
Yeah.
And so I really enjoyed this community bowling alley because you could get to know the people there, and I wrote poems about them. And so that was my first body of work, was writing these poems about the people coming in of a bowling alley, and it's kind of like a working class scene, and people were really interested and just so funny. Yeah. And then I sent that pamphlet of poems to Fran Britton at Queen's, and she said that I had promise, and that was I was like, oh, maybe I can write some poems.
And why Queen's? What is Queen's the place to go to study poetry, or what was the attraction to Belfast for you?
Well, I always think studying is a good opportunity to go somewhere else, and I ended up doing my BA in London because I wanted to know people after my degree, and I never saw myself being away from London, so that was the pull. But when I did the MA, I just thought, well, what European houses are really good for poems? And I saw that Queen's was really good.
Amen.
Yeah,
absolutely. And we'll get to that in a moment, Jake. I want to talk to you about your poetry and your first collection. But before we do that, you found yourself at some point as a young adult in church, and that was a new experience for you. Church hadn't been part of your life growing up, from what you've told me. Do you mind sharing with us a little bit about how that happened, how you found yourself?
Yeah, I think I was really, intellectually interested in Christianity for a long time, but it was just kind of a flirtation. And when my father passed away, I felt very hopeless. And without going into the full conversion story, there was kind of a moment in the hospital that was profound. And I had to start taking it seriously. But it changed my heart completely, and it's begun to change me. There's a lot more that needs to change, but I know that it's happening, in my life. So, faith has become the most beautiful thing in my life, other than my little son, So, yeah.
And it's interesting for me, having known your story and then reading But and Though. I've said to you before, I could almost trace your spiritual journey through this book. As you were writing some of these poems, you were discovering church, you're discovering faith for the first time.
Yeah, I actually went, when I was writing the final poems for the first book, I went back home to London for a year, and I was working in a school. And I thought, well, this is a great opportunity, being away from my wife, to really just, I got baptized, and I've really embedded myself in the church, and I found my local church where my mum used to have ballet lessons. There was an Eritrean man, and I I walked into his service and I saw him talk, and I just, as soon as he finished talking, I said, well, do you want to baptize me? And he said, well, should we do it at Easter? And then, so we did it at Easter. And I went to classes with him after work and sat with him. But it was so, like, it was meant to be because he is such a relaxed man, and he made me feel like I could be a Christian, you know? I felt like, oh, I could love Jesus too. I know it was just something so, you know, he was in prison for his faith. He's been through so much, and yet he's so humble and just incredible. It's Bahani Asmalash. He works for the persecuted church. Meeting him made me a Christian, I think.
Yeah, it's wonderful, Jake. And maybe we can talk a bit about poetry and all of this as well then. And I noticed a little bit earlier in your previous answer, you talked about making a poem. You know, many of us would think about writing a poem. So I guess the question I would like to ask you, and this is a hard question to answer, is what happens when you're being creative, when you're making a poem, writing a poem, painting a picture? What do you think's actually happening? What is the creative process?
He's not going
just
easy.
Just right
on
in
me.
the deep end.
It's not going easy on me at all. I thought he was my friend. You know what I mean? No, I mean, when I make, I think it's what I really love about it is that I'm not thinking about tomorrow. I'm not concerned about anything at work. I go somewhere else. And I would like to think that one thing I think about a lot actually is, it's an image in one of the poems in there, is how right now, me looking at you, no one else has this perspective on earth, right? So in one way, I'm like a camera for God, you know what I mean? No one else has this view, and everyone here has like literally a different view and seen different things today. So I think that all that adds up to an experience, and then the experience adds up to what you make. And you know, I was saying earlier about how I think a psalm is a way of capturing a unique thought on God, and maybe we all have a unique thought on God. So I don't know. I mean, that's a hard question, but...
Well, we'll come back to it, because I've got some thoughts I want to tease out with you, but why don't we just pause here and hear a poem?
Yes.
Would you maybe read something to us from But and No, and then we'll talk about the other publication shortly?
Yeah. After my father passed away, will I read 3 now?
Yeah, that would be great.
So this gives you a good insight, actually, to how I was feeling before coming to faith. These are probably the successful things I wrote about my dad. Writing about someone you really care about is really hard because you don't want to get it wrong. But yeah, this poem's called I See You. The obese book I finished says, early sibling and parental deaths statistically more common in families experiencing problems with problem drinking. But after Dad died from a broken heart, the cardiologist failed to mention your vodka orange, the wrestling, the launching of heels towards Dad's face while he smashed the garden gate Granddad built into 2, 4, 6, 8, who do we appreciate pieces. What's up, Doc? No problemo. When we pulled the plug because his brain was mush, you and I are both left for a smoke. Sensing my hostility, you kept your distance and words empty, like a weightless coffee cup in the movements of a soap actress, all the unsung melodies. Going through what's left, there's Dad's old phone with your number stored as both boozy and woozy. Despite being dizzy, he still loved and loves you. To say his heart wasn't up to it, though, too easy. The Rappers. On stilts, the McDonald's sign is visible from all positions around the estate, between washing, flapping on balconies, or at the heel of a fleet of Royal Mail vans. When our father died, my youngest brother, Ronnie, ordered Mackie D's every morning to be delivered to our door by a driver who had picked it up less than 400 meters from our house. less than one full lap of a running track. He is grateful, tips, and this goes on for weeks. Dad died from hypercholesterolemia. I can never say that word.
But you can write it.
Hypertension, a heart attack. Ronnie's breakfast depresses me. The wrappers sit bent in the bin, sulking melancholic brown pools of grease like tidy lagoons. No bathers. The same brown as a letter received about Dad's kidneys and their new lease of life in another dad of a distant family. Mum was glad to get that letter, but it kept her in bed for another couple of weeks. The game shows of Saturday fend off the silence. Only the deliveries open a door to sunlight. This is probably a good segue because I don't want to reduce my dad to my dad's humanity, but he was like Del Boy.
Del Boy?
Yeah, and my dad was a delivery driver, and apparently the parcels, I don't condone this, God, I don't condone this, but the parcels that would be fraudulent, my dad would keep, right? So there was a whole room in my house full of parcels of like clothes and stuff, right? So it's like Del Boy's house. So this poem is called Off the Back of a Lorry. A picture of you on a hot balcony in a white t-shirt with the print, "They'll always be in England," and Gaza in tears, applauding up to the crowd. I drove home the night you passed away and a song came on the radio, Vinique or Come Here, and this is how men like you go, isn't it, Dad? With £300 in a bank account and a bedroom of box fresh trainers that fell off the back. I didn't know what else to get, you said as you bopped out the tattooist on Margate Beach, with the cross of St. George on your calf, a close French crop and sweating McMilkshake. Our hometown was built by concreting over marshland. I'll miss how dirty you were all the time. Are you upstairs, delivering parcels and catching what falls? Or sat beside the Ark of the Covenant in the 12th Lalibela? You were my church built into a great rock. You were its shade. Yeah.
Thank you, Jake. You know, it's interesting reading your book. I got such a vivid impression of your family members. Like, you're able to capture people so well. And, you know, as you probably picked up, especially in that first poem, I think there's this wonderful blend of humor, like gentle humor with the poignancy of your grief, which is very, very powerful. And Jake, I suppose what I would like to ask you is, I mean, this is a very personal collection of poems. It's almost autobiographical in lots of ways. I'm sure that has not been easy to write and also to share with others. Can you tell us a little bit about the experience of writing about your own life in that way?
I wanted to write from the perspective of a child and alcoholic because although there's a lot of literature, I don't know, I guess you could say like addiction and recovery literature, like after the 90s, it's very much from the sort of addict's perspective, and but the trauma of addiction generates a secondary trauma, you know. Well, the trauma that leads to addiction can generate a secondary trauma that can affect other people and the people closest to you. But the reason why I read that about my dad is because I've felt for a long time that I actually feel that having the experience growing up like that had led me to faith, because when you are in an addicted family, you can't take anything for granted. Like, up is down, left is right. You can't take truth for granted. You know, someone tells you the sky is blue, you look for yourself, because everything is so unpredictable. So I think for a long time I thought, well, you know, that experience inspired me to want to find truth in my life. And maybe Jesus recognized that. But I don't think that was a reward. But I do think it created a thirst in me for truth. But then I was thinking recently that, actually I've just been around like so much sin. Like the theft and maybe that's maybe that's just developed in a sense in me, like, this isn't, there's something else, like this isn't right, like I talk to my Catholic friend Zoe sometimes, and like we talk about how, like, we're both blessed and cursed to still be able to hear a bit of Eden, because if we didn't, I think this world would be very easy, but because we can, there's just like this nagging thing that, people aren't good to each other,
And let's explore like how poetry and art can help us grapple with the fallenness of the world. And I guess one of the things you said early on, as a young man, you really resonated with war poetry, even though you'd never been to war, but there was something about the beauty you talked about and the chaos, I think was the phrase you used. And it reminded me of, I've shared this with you before, Sam Wells, the vicar of St. Martin in the Fields, I heard him say once about, when we encounter things that are ugly and sad in the world, the temptation is to fix them and make them happy. And his line is, if we can't make them happy, make them beautiful. And that resonates very deeply with me, because that's the Christian story, isn't it? You know, that, Christ makes beauty out of brokenness. And the cross is an example of that. So I wonder, like, Jake, does that resonate with you, that idea of beauty in the brokenness?
Yeah. I mean, I think this project is definitely recycling the pain of my own pain. But I also want to, shine a light on characters like my dad and their humanity, and they still have a lot of goodness in them. And my mum would wear tracksuit bottoms, but she would also give you her last tenner, so it's sort of, I think working class people can be written off and cliched, and clichéing someone and is kind of a way of writing them off anyway, because you're just denying their humanity. But it's really hard to talk about these people authentically without, like reaching for cliches or whatever. So I want to. That's part of, I guess, seeing the beauty in the chaos. But I also think that acceptance is a beautiful thing as well. You talk about, making something painful beautiful, but sometimes it's accepting. Acceptance is really beautiful, because I think I got to a point in my life as well where I realized, probably because of how I grew up, that I was looking at everything and asking myself what could be changed to make it better, or better for people, or better, even like I had this moment where I was looking at a railway bridge in London and the graffiti on it, and I was like, oh, would it be nicer without the graffiti on it, or is it okay? And I was like, isn't it interesting that I'm just not just looking at it, Like, and there's a beauty to acceptance.
Yeah, there is, and there's something really profound, in the Christian story, the Christian imagination. I often think of the resurrection appearances of Jesus. And Jesus appears with his wounds, with the scars on his side and wounds on his hands. And, when we think of new creation, when we think of the idea of redemption, resurrection, it's not going to be clean the way maybe we would imagine it to be. There is something about our woundedness is actually part of the beauty of new creation.
Yeah, I like the word mess, like when I make a painting, for me, like collage is a bringing together of disparate parts that creates a balance. So your balance is, probably synonymous with beauty. So I think if we was to look at human history, if we could possibly look at it, it would be a very beautiful thing to look at, and yet in the detail of it is chaos, Like Charlie Chaplin said, life is a tragedy in close-up, but a comedy in long shot, which is the same sentiment, And I think that, but I think my experiences, when I reflect on it, it makes me realize that I have found faith in and through the chaos, not just in spite of it, That's really important to me, because without that experience, I might not have found faith. So in some ways, that's been part of the plan for me.
Yeah.
And then the question would be, well, has God made me suffer? You go down that road. But actually, this, as we're told, the present suffering is nothing compared to what's to come.
Yeah, and we've had these deep conversations about foreknowledge and all of that. It comes down to me that, that out of our suffering, God can bring good, and but whether or not God ever causes suffering is something, I would be uncomfortable with that idea. But certainly, Jake, like reading your poetry book, I was very thankful for it, because, we share some things in common in our story. I don't mind sharing that I finished your book on a flight to see my birth father, who lives in London, who had just received a diagnosis, and I found it deeply, deeply moving, and it sort of opened up, emotions in me that, probably I hadn't in a while, just by probably encountering some of my own story through somebody else's. And that's the power of art, isn't it? That we're reading ourselves a lot of the time when we're reading somebody else's work. Are there artists, poets that have done that for you?
When people ask me my favourite part, I always say Maeve McGuckian from here. She's wild. I think Maeve McGuckian is the Mark Rothko of the contemporary art world for me. And she was doing something quite unique at a time when maybe a woman wouldn't have got credit for doing that, Have I gone off? I don't know. Here we go. Maeve McGuckian would be very similar to John Ashbery for me, but John Ashbery's a man and he's American, and so I don't know. But then, ironically, all the criticism on Maeve McGuckian is on her feminism instead of her invention, which kind of, I don't know. But I really like what she does with imagery in her work. It doesn't have much to do with addiction, but that was part of the project. I don't think I didn't find anything similar to what I was trying to write. So,
and that's the mystery of art as well, that art can speak to us in ways we don't fully understand. And I even think back to my own experience at school, reading things that should have been totally unrelated to my experience, and yet resonated with me at a very deep level. Jake, maybe we should just pause here and talk a little bit about this little book. So this is, it's actually your third publication, am I right? Was there another? Before?
Yeah.
And this is quite special because it's exclusive to St. John's here. It's a collection of poems that you've put together for here and for people to pick up. There are about 100 copies, we think maybe more. The printer gave us an extra 20 maybe.
But we won't tell them that.
We won't tell
the crowd.
We had a fright this week as our printer let us down at the last minute, and an amazing guy from Impro came through at the last minute and produced a really high quality piece. Jake, would you read maybe a poem or two out of this for us?
Yep.
Then I'll ask you another question.
Okay.
And could I put in a request this time? My favourite poem, I've only read these this week, but Charlie the Pigeon, I loved. Would you
I'll read
that for
Charlie the Pigeon. Such a serious artist, aren't I? Charlie the Pigeon. Who even knows your real name in pigeon language? What did you think of me as my hands folded over your wings to pull you from the street where you were bleeding and hell-bent on stepping into traffic? Then under a wheel, a mother and her daughter parked their car to help me, and we found a number tied to the red ridges of your feet. You bled over my jacket as I held you in the back seat on the way to an emergency vet's, who turned their noses up at the sight of a pigeon, didn't even let you in the building, and brought a cage out to the car park. What is the term in your language for this type of discrimination? I asked the mother to take the bumps slowly. By the time we'd parked the car, you were letting me stroke your neck, and your eyes were closing. I knew you were dying, as we all are, but the owner called later, the owner who lived 20 miles from the city you had flown to visit, and told me you were doing okay, just fine. Typical bloke, not much to say other than that you were alive, and he was thankful. I imagine you back home now, newly unsure of yourself, wondering how you ever made it back from that snow shaker city, the gush of your feathers ripped from your back by a tire, wondering how many days you'll have left now, as we will, with your friends, telling them in your own words about the trip, the new awareness of your limits, and the sense you felt and still feel of somewhere else, of eternity, of paradise for the pigeons too, where I hope we'll meet again one day, swapping war stories.
See why I love that poem. And I'm so sorry that my phone went off. I turned it off silent so I would hear the printer today. I never have my phone off silent. I really apologize for that, Jake. Would you read one more for us?
Yes.
Uninterrupted this time.
Dubrovnik. I wanted so badly to be pink Himalayan salt sprinkled over prawn carpaccio, a light column of air, the shadow of an unknown worker beneath scaffolding, to kiss the tears rolling down their face, to dry them with my hair, to be swept into the outer reaches, knowing my true parents gave me the best of themselves. Knowing what I am not, some strength comes from being able to walk polished marble streets, aware of my flaws, secure through the forgiveness, the humility. Abundance plays in an airport lounge on a piano as people wait for their gate to be called. Eternity is in the heart. Didn't Jesus walking on the sea begin the history of ballet? Do it through love, they still teach the ballerinas. Spin in love. Pigeons sleep this night above a bust carving of Saint Blaise, defender of the city. Did our hearts not burn within? In the convent they sing, Maria, Maria, are you going into town with your baby? Will you visit the markets with your boy? Tourists stop to listen by the open windows, eating oranges, leaving peelings on the sills. Burnt zest fills the evening dusk. Death is the curse of this life, Maria, Maria. No, death just tells us something beautiful has come to an end. Do they turn the lights off in the aquarium after its closing? Does the octopus breathing in the corner of its tank know about the Messiah walking above, of the waitress sharpening coloring pencils for the children at her tables, of us being so weak? Today my prayer's messy. Hope you don't mind my calling so late. If the nows could speak, they would say, even the soldiers hammering at our heads could smell your perfume, Maria, Maria, which you prepared and poured onto his legs. The tang of sweat, heavy Red Sea salt crusting lips, and the bruised scent of blackberries. It is late, it is so late, but give us this day our daily bread, meaning let the work of human hands, the grapes pressed between the toes of workers in distant fields, conspire to save us from ourselves again tonight, O Lord.
Jake, as I was listening to that one, I was sort of brought back to our conversation earlier about what are you doing when you're writing a poem. And, that poem, to my mind, is about attention, isn't it, as well? And this noticing. And I wonder, is that what's happening when you're writing a poem? Are you seeing in a way that, you talked about this before, the idea that we all have a perspective. And I think in conversation before, you mentioned Simone Weil and that quotation about, what is it, generosity is, or attention is the purest.
Is the rarest and purest form of generosity.
Yeah. Tell us about what she meant by that. Do you think of what it means to you, that idea of attention being a form of generosity?
Well, I work for the Salvation Army and I work in a homeless hostel. I've been doing it for nearly 2 years now. And when I started, I think I felt it was quite like sentimental, this idea of, just listen to someone and just give them attention. And, maybe you can't do much, but that does a lot, And I thought, well, I don't know, it doesn't feel like it's doing a lot. But it really, to make people feel noticed, can keep them alive. I've seen that. So I guess art does that. But I think that there's just something so special about recording God's history in a way. Even though I don't think I'm making history. But there's that quote, isn't there, about poetry is closer to history than the history books. And I think when I read that quote, I think what that means to me is if we're not capturing human emotion when we capture history, then we're not really capturing it.
Well, even thinking back to the war poets, capturing a way of seeing and understanding the war that's very different from what was being taught, it's that time as well. As a minister, I'm interested in Christianity as a way of seeing the world, and increasingly, attracted to that idea that, faith gives us a different way of seeing, a different capacity for seeing. But I'm also struck that probably in the tradition of which I'm a part, and you, Jake, as well now, the Presbyterian, kind of that broad Reformed tradition, we haven't been great at thinking about the sacramental. And by that, I mean seeing the world around us as a sign that points us to something deeper, something truer. And, our Catholic friends, brothers and sisters, are so much better at this. But, one of the things I discovered, in my research, reading John Calvin, this great figure in our tradition, he had this wonderful sacramental way of seeing, which we wouldn't have expected, describing, the world, creation, as the theater of God's glory. And I wonder, Jake, as an artist in the church, how can we, I suppose, particularly in the Protestant sort of tradition, recover some of that way of seeing the world sacramentally? Does that make sense to you?
Yeah. I think we can learn from a lot of good Catholic poets like Patrick Kavanagh. Patrick Kavanagh is a good example because, well, he had issues with alcohol as well, actually, but he felt quite alienated from the church and from local ministers to the point where I don't think he could really bring himself to go. But now he's held up as a Catholic poet with a capital C, which is really interesting because they didn't like him when he was alive. He was too messy and too dirty. So I think about what Pope Francis says a lot about, being shepherds with the smell of our sheep, But
say that again for us. What did he say?
Shepherds with the smell of our sheep on us. And the hostel is a good example because I see, God moving in a place where you have people that other people would avoid, and I think I see God moving in those details there. I saw a fish resurrected, but that's another story. But I think it's a bold statement, but I think that good Christian art is is the truest form of art. I really think that, because for me, what I would say the difference is between even from But Unknown where I am now is I want what I'm making to be involved in the Christian mystery somehow. And I think because that's so conscious in my making and what I want to do, if I'm not mentioning an element of the Trinity, I feel like I've failed, which is silly because then I'm becoming too conscious of what I'm doing in a way. But I guess there's probably just this vain thing of wanting to see a difference in my work. But I do, if we're in the Christian mystery, like surely that's, I think a lot of poets write out of mystery and investigating mystery. But as a Christian poet, you have to sort of reconcile with the fact that you don't believe it's a mystery anymore. You do believe it's a mystery, but it's a Christian mystery. And so it's still a mystery, but and with all the intel beauty, but it's not just anything goes anymore. So
yeah, you've got a grammar now.
You've got a grammar.
You're working with mystery then. So one of the sort of central mysteries, I guess, that art is grappling with is what does it mean to be human? The human condition. And I'm really interested, Jake, like in our cultural moment with the rise of artificial intelligence and discussions about, us transcending our humanity as a race, the transhuman, that we can become, part machine, or, all of these crazy ideas of science fiction that are now being pursued as a goal. And, what does art for you have to say to that question, and how important is creativity to who we are as human beings? Because it seems to me now that we've become a society that's, on Sunday I'll be talking a bit about this, but I came across a phrase, we're a copy and paste culture. We just copy and paste things.
Yeah.
Rather than take time to create, take time to be bored, take time to reflect, to pay attention to things. Yeah. And with AI, it seems like that's just been, accelerated, because now artificial algorithms or whatever are generating our creative content as well.
Yeah.
So, what are your thoughts on all of that?
Well, it's funny because we use AI in Hostel, which is like, you wouldn't think, but if we write a procedure on something, the AI model does it for us by looking at everything that's already been written. But then if you receive an email from a manager, I can still tell when it's been written by AI, because it's very impersonal. There's no character. There's no sense of character in it.
So you do get emails from?
Oh yeah, like I'll be reprimanded by AI. Like I'll get an email like telling me I've done something wrong, but it's copy and paste from AI. It's like, and this is just a small Hostel. So yeah, it's really interesting. But I think we talked about before about this idea of nothing new under the sun. I don't think, when selfies come out and phones where you could take portraits of yourself, like there was that, it was probably on a smaller level, but there was that buzz then. And actually the idea of, taking a flattering picture of yourself is what the wealthy were always able to do with paintings back in the day. So it's not, these things that feel new, the impulse below them often isn't. I think with, but we go back to like what we was talking about with making and the end. Making art isn't just about what comes at the end of having the thing that you've actually made. It's the process. Yeah. And sure, like I'm sure AI could make could look at 6 of my paintings and make the 7th, but the thing that's actually refreshing for me in that has been missed, the actual making. And I think that making can be very prayerful, and maybe it should be.
And maybe that's a good segue into where I would like to take us as well, thinking about art and prayer. If anybody saw the sort of the social media stuff to promote tonight, there's a picture of you in your workspace in Ballyhackamore, and on your blackboard.
I should have tidied before I came
You should have tidied, yeah. I would have been disappointed if it was a tidy workshop. In that studio you have written, painting is prayer. Yeah. In big letters on that whiteboard. Why? What does that phrase mean to you? Why did you write that?
I think I want everything to be, I think every moment in our life can make us more saintly, and we can do everything prayerfully. And I think art and making can be one avenue to drawing closer to God and seeing more of him in this world. Because ultimately, I think when I was a secular person, I try and think back now and I'm like, what was the point of living? It sounds dramatic, but I think the point of living was that I'll get to Friday night and I'll have a pizza, Like, that's great, that's comfort, that's fun.
You had pizza tonight.
We
so
did.
You still like pizza on a Friday night.
But now that wouldn't be anywhere near enough for me with what I know faith offers me. And what, for me, Psalm 26, I've been meditating a lot recently, it says I will wait on the face of the Lord. I will wait. Even just that refrain. For me, that's, if Christ is the second Adam and we have Christ, and Adam before the fall was in fellowship with God walking in the garden, and Christ restores us to that, I don't think we have to wait until we're at the end of our lives to see God. I think we get to see God in this world now, because we're back in fellowship. And that's the meaning of living for me now. And so in some ways, I think my work is a part of that, or God wants that to be a part of me through a relationship with him. But I think that's the most important thing now.
I don't know if you would describe, sermon writing as an art form, but for me, I've always found preparing a sermon for a Sunday is an act of worship for me.
Yeah.
It is, because I think I'm the type of person that I think as I write.
Yeah.
So, I'm not often good at just, when I'm describing the sermon to Emma, she'll say, "What? I can't follow what you're saying." What?
Yeah.
I'm like, and then I have to get it down on the page before it really makes sense. And even last week with the terrible unrest in Belfast, and I was leading prayers here, I knew I had to sit and pray by writing that prayer. Do you know what I mean, Jake? I couldn't just, I had to spend that time, I had to wait, I had to listen, pay attention that week, and then that sort of cathartic, it's hard to describe, but there's something in all of us. We're made in the image of God. We're made in the image of our Creator. Theologians argue about what that means. Surely it must mean that we're made to create.
Yeah.
And that creativity and our worship are almost two sides of the same coin,
It was like laughter. What purpose does laughter really serve?
Yeah.
When someone makes us laugh when we react, often what we're laughing of, I've read something about how laughter is related to the fall or something, but this idea of if someone falls over and they're not hurt, right, you might laugh at that because it's ridiculous. That's not how the world's meant to be.
Yeah.
Which is which makes us think about Eden, So why, but if someone's hurt, we wouldn't laugh.
No.
So I think that God just gives us these, I think art is, I think there's a divine spark in us, and we carry it, We
Absolutely.
carry that.
I'm laughing because, as my wife knows, I which
fall over all the time.
Yes, but I have this thing where, you've been framed.
Yeah.
I don't sit down to watch it, but if it's on, I find it makes me laugh like nothing else. But if somebody's hurt in it, it's not funny at all.
Yeah.
It's really interesting.
Yeah, isn't that interesting?
It's interesting. Jake, we're going to wrap up our conversation soon, but you've talked about, art and prayer and making is important and all of that. I guess I'm also thinking about the role the church has to play in all of this, especially if, we're in an age where we're questioning what it means to be a human and we're outsourcing our humanity to the algorithm. It seems to me the church has a really vital role to play in our culture. And I've been reading a book recently by a vicar called Al Gordon called Spark. And he's the vicar of a church in East London called Saint. And they major on the creative arts and being, a space for creativity. He talks about the need for every local church to be a cathedral to creativity. And he has this lovely illustration in his book where one of the things they wanted to do when they started the church, it was a beautiful old building in East London, falling apart. You know, they had to put buckets out on a Sunday when it rained to catch the water, this sort of thing. So they were part of this project of revitalization. And he had this idea to keep bees. And so they got a couple of beehives, and there's some funny stories around all that. But eventually they had, I think, 8 hives. And one day he got an email from a local person, a neighbor, saying thank you. And so he opened this email in curiosity. And he discovered that this man had said, look, I've been growing, you know, fruit and vegetables in my garden for years. This summer, you know, it's been more fruitful, more abundant, and I couldn't understand why. You know, I'm watering the same, the weather's been the same, and then I realized it's the bees. So I just want to thank you. And he said this was a beautiful metaphor for him of the church, you know, that we have the hive, but what we do actually pollinates the rest of culture when we do it well, when we can be that space where people can come to be creative and explore their creativity. So like, as somebody, you know, who's relatively new to church and a person who is a creative, how can the church cultivate creativity? And I don't mean how can the church make us all poets and painters and appreciate poetry and everything, but how can the church help us all to re-engage with our creativity in that broadest sense? Because creativity is much broader than writing a poem or painting a canvas, as we know. You know, it involves everything we do in lots of ways.
Yeah, I mean, I read a quote recently that said every bit of goodness requires a bit of artfulness, you know, and you actually have to be quite creative to do good things, to do good deeds. So I think they're already happening. You know, I see many people at this church doing those things all the time and doing them quietly, and I don't know. I mean, I think me and you have spoke a lot about the road to Emmaus scene when you know, the two are walking and they meet Christ, and then they say, well, it's like, I love the slapstick moments in the Bible, right? I think God has a great sense of humor. Absolutely. You know, like, why are you talking about the beam in someone else's eye? No, the speck in someone else's eye without the beam in your own eye.
Yeah, Jesus loved the absurd.
Yeah,
I think,
but it's completely absurd. That's that's a Buster Keaton scene.
Yeah.
You know, there's such a slapstick image. It's funny. You know, and sometimes I'm like, guys, this is funny. You know, but there's so many slapstick moments in that. In you know, and this idea that they've been walking with Jesus and they didn't recognize him, that's quite funny, right? And then they sit down and then he disappears. That's quite funny. And then they say, didn't our hearts burn within? And like, I love that because it's such a validation of our emotions. And I think you talk about like the Reformed and Protestant tradition, we probably come at it from different angles and have different opinions, but I think there's a suspicion of emotion and a suspicion of, and you know, we can understand where that comes from because our emotions can take over and then we sin and we do bad things. But it's also how we know that God's been present and how we know that we've been moved by God and how we've seen the face of God. Like, we have to trust our emotions at times. So, you know, the idea that they're like, oh yeah, something special's happened, and they only realize afterwards, you know? So, yeah, I could talk all day about the slapstick moments in the Bible, but... Yeah,
and we get plenty of slapstick in this church with me falling over and forgetting things and all the rest on a Sunday. If you want to see that, come along. Jake, I've got one final question for you maybe, which is about the title of this pamphlet you've produced for us. You've called it The Offering. And tell us why that is and what it maybe says about, you know, where you are at the moment in your art.
Yeah, a few of these poems would have gone in bottom though, actually, but I had a secular editor, and it's really interesting because I was telling my friend the other day that in making this and pulling this together, I liked some of the poems, again, that I wrote while I was writing this. But I think I was writing Christian poems in a lot more unconscious way, or a lot like I wasn't getting in my own way, in a way. And so I look back at those poems and I'm like, oh, that was actually quite successful. And they've kind of formed the spine of this, which is interesting. It's almost like I've been able to step back from myself and realize that they were okay, you know? Kind of give my permission to, I don't know, self-permission to write more. But yeah, I mean, this is, I think there's something very special just about being like, these are these poems for this. There's 100 copies. Whoever gets one, whoever doesn't. And yeah, hopefully it's, me trying to write within the mystery and act within the mystery as well.
And there's something beautiful about just writing as an act of worship. You know, one of our favorite poets is George Herbert. And I just love the story of George Herbert, you know, this parish priest who gave up the opportunity to be prime minister basically in his day to become a local priest, and wrote this incredible work called The Temple. But he wrote it for himself, for his own prayer life. And on his deathbed made his friend promise that he would throw it in the fire. Thankfully, the friend did not keep that promise, and we have this amazing work. And it was an offering, wasn't it? It was something written from the soul for God. So Jake, maybe to finish for us tonight, would you read one or two more from the offering for us to whet our appetite?
Yeah.
I really like the Lazarus one as well.
Which one?
Lazarus one.
I'll read the Lazarus one. Okay.
But, you know, you choose.
I'll read the Lazarus one. So this poem is after Lucille, where am I here? I've got to call that, Lucille Clifton poem, Lazarus. I think she wrote several Lazarus poems. Some of them are in sections, so there might be multiples out there, but American poet, very good. Lazarus speaks. I finally found my place, my name set at the table with the angels, and my heart no longer in lace, no longer anxious or bound for elsewhere, when suddenly I was back in the dark of that cave with the Nazarene calling my name. Come out, wherever you are, his voice running through me. My sisters still crying, this time for joy. Our neighbors, they became suspicious, stopped sharing with us the gossip of town. My sisters and I familiar with powers they had never known. We forgave them when they passed us in the street without looking up, when the storekeepers held the best fruit and freshest bread for them. We got by. We had to practice life again, and this time I set my limits, asked what I should change about myself, what I was prepared to do, then put my mind to it. I undertook my work and accepted the rest, the results, what I could and couldn't affect. It was something akin to complete peace, to completeness. Everything else left in his hands, I said. The streets weren't the same, not just because I had felt the canvas of heaven over my eyelids, had walked with the angels to the glistening blue fonts to bathe and soak their wings, had run my fingers through their hair so that it did not crinkle when drying there in the twilight of the promised land. No, it's because of this acceptance. Martha and Mary call it shalom fulfilled. I found myself there, really there this time, serving myself, then resting in him. Funnily enough, this is how our neighbors began to ask questions, share bread with us again, and would wait on our answers. Everything in his holy, holy, holy palms, I said. This is how the light gets in. serving yourself to the problems, then moving with acceptance, even after you topple over, and you will. Funny, it was when I realized how much of heaven was already here that I got to come back, knowing what it means to return. What did I miss? They still ask me. The sun over the market, its dust, its children laughing.
Jake, will you read one more?
One more, okay.
I'll let you choose this one.
This is the first poem of the book. The reason why I feel like this book is meant to be is because Colette Bryce, no less, rejected it from But No. Colette Bryce is great, by the way. No shade on Colette Bryce. She's incredible. But this was one we didn't have in But No. It felt too far from the collection. But I was always pushing for it because I really like it. But I was always probably pushing for it even though I knew it probably wasn't properly finished. But in the build-up of tonight, this was the first poem I went back to and thought, I'll read that again. And I realized I really liked it again. And the last line, which was never finished, I changed. And because of what me and Paul talked about, the offering, it gave me the last line.
So it's finished?
So now it's finished, and it was only finished because me and Paul had this chat and decided to do this. And before I read this, we end, I feel, this is kind of a metaphor for me saying that is a metaphor for how encouraging this whole thing has been, because trying to write Christian poems into the mystery in a secular world that doesn't care can be very disheartening and very lonely. But Paul has made me feel very encouraged, and I thank you to Emma as well for helping us pull this together. I just think it's so God orientated that it's the church that have encouraged me again. So
let's hear the poem.
Yeah, that's the longest introduction to a poem you're ever going to hear. The Trolley Collector. He says he nearly died taking street drugs, that he lives in the flats opposite the grungy wholesalers, that these silver starlet supermarket trolleys are his geometric friends, his dinky semester songs, and his way of gathering himself together while waving to the night students, knitting slinky metallic chains, a cardigan for the sea, a birthday card for the sun, when this long winter lifts eventually. Oh, eventually. His gait is throwing foreign coins into a fountain somewhere hot, but this fountain is the spluttering sleet against the linoleum of a welcoming heart in this car park for as long as I can remember. This sleet is a family of mistakes, jabbing southpaws, dibbing, dabbing as his two mittened hands pluck out from beneath two lime green fluorescent sleeves. One wheel shakes its head, another spins donuts. The trolley collector did not give up, though granted this looks a lot like giving up. But his rally against the poverty of despair made only the marginalia of the library books, so now he understands the cost of accepting suffering without permitting desire more than most, listening more than he talks. Somehow he pays the price, and I think I know how. Service is happiness, he believes. He offers what he has.
He offers what he has. Thank you, Jake, for offering what you have to us tonight. I'm glad we've encouraged you, but you've encouraged us. Let's give him a big clap. Before we go, though, we should plug tomorrow. So
Yes.
We've talked about being a cathedral of creativity, encouraging creativity. Jake, tomorrow you and Jean Wave for us, will be facilitating a workshop, and if I'm right, it starts at 11.
Yes.
Is that right? 11 until 1. We're calling this the Ormer Road Psalter. So I think you'll be using the Psalms and thinking about looking at the Psalms in a poetic way, and then hopefully encouraging us to write. So please do come along to that if you're interested. And
it's going to be very strenuous.
Yes, very. We'll be doing some warm-up exercises, you told me. And the last thing to mention is, if I can borrow the book, so we have about 100 plus copies of these. We're suggesting a donation of £10 if you would like to pick one up. But, you know, if you don't have the money, we would love to give this to you as an offering as well. These books or poems are quite special, and I always find hearing poetry is one thing, and it's wonderful to hear you read your poetry, but I need to sit with a poem and read it multiple times, and I'd really encourage you to do that. There's some wonderful poems in here, wonderful poems as well about Bible characters that I will be stealing and using at Easter and Christmas for our different services here, Jake. But please do, they'll be available at the back. I think Karina maybe will be there to...
My real aim is just to be quoted by you one day, I think.
We see, there we go. Careful what you wish for, Jake.
I'm just your fanboy, Paul. I'm just your fanboy.
Let's give him one more round of applause and thank you all for coming.
Thank you.
Well, we hope you enjoyed this conversation with Jake Hawkey, and to find out more about Jake's art and his writing, you can check out his website, jakefrancis.blog. You can also check out our church website, newtonbreda.org, if you'd like to get your hands on a copy of the offering. Just drop us an email and we'll find out a way to get it to you. And of course, Jake's first collection of poetry, But and Though, is available in all good bookstores.